Hi, I'm Alex at the History Tellers, and this time on Tales from a Notebook, I've got one of the all-time classics, not just of the History Teller stories, but of war stories in total. Yes, it is that well-known favourite, the Dambusters raid. Now this has been a History Tellers story right from the start. In fact, it predates History Tellers. Abs used to do this on his own as a one-man show, and then when the History Tellers got together, we adapted it, improved it to make it a two-person performance. And in that research, I filled up my notebook with all sorts of stuff that we just don't use. So I want to tell you a little something that I discovered. Now, the Dams Raid is really a famous operation. It is, of course, when 617 Squadron of the Royal Air Force flew their specially modified Lancasters over to Germany, where they used unusual bouncing bombs to destroy big hydroelectric dams. That much is quite common knowledge, but there's some little bits on the side that don't normally get talked about, and we just haven't got time for in our normal live performance. Now, the Dams Raid was on quite a tight schedule. They had to take place at the right time when the water was at the highest in the reservoirs, and due to this tight time constraints, certain things that were going to happen didn't. In particular, the sister squadron of 617 never got to fly. Now, you probably know that 617 Squadron was formed specifically to bomb the dams, but at the same time, there was a sister squadron numbered 618, and these had their own mission. 618 were going to be using smaller twin-engine Mosquito bombers rather than the big four-engine Lancasters of 617. And rather than using the big Upkeep mine of 617, they had their own weapon, Highball, and this smaller spherical sort of version of the bouncing bomb would be spun and dropped just as it was from the Lancasters, but on miniature scale. Of course, I say miniature, it's still pretty big and certainly would have packed a huge punch, and this was going to be used for another very special mission. 618 Squadron had been training up in Scotland initially, but then all over the UK, training with their smaller bouncing bombs, ready to attack another waterborne target, not dams by reservoirs, but a battleship. Not just any battleship either. 618 Squadron was going to attack the Tirpitz, possibly the most feared piece of German weaponry of the Second World War. The idea was that 618 Mosquitoes would fly out of Scotland, find the Tirpitz hidden in the Norwegian fjords, and use their bouncing bombs to sink the Tirpitz where she lay at anchor. Now, for various reasons, this didn't happen. Partly weather, partly training problems, partly technical problems with the Highball weapon. Now, they decided at the last minute to scrap 618's mission and concentrate on getting the 617 Dambuster Squadron done correctly and properly. Now, because of that time constraint, they needed the water level to be high in the reservoir. It had to take place in sort of late spring. 618 weren't ready, and so when it looked like they couldn't make it, but 617 had to go, the decision was made. We'll not do Tirpitz, we'll concentrate on bombing the dams. 618 would actually be reassigned to fly off aircraft carriers. They'd be sent over to the Pacific Theatre, where they would carry on doing all sorts of carrier-borne operations over there, never really revisiting the idea of the Highball bouncing bomb. And it's a shame, because there's some really interesting footage of Highball being tested. And it's not just being tested on water either. Here we can see they were testing this on land. Now, this really is interesting footage, and it made me think, how many of you have seen the 60s war movie 633 Squadron? It's sort of like a greatest hits of the Second World War all mashed into one story. 633 has taken ideas from all over the place and shoved it into one single film. It has the bomb destroying a rock which falls on a factory, using nature against the German war machine, much like the Dams Raid. Another film that, just like 633 Squadron, stole ideas from the Dams Raid was Mosquito Squadron. Again, this film stole all sorts of bits of history to make a sort of greatest hits of Bomber Command. In that, a crack squadron flying mosquitoes had to use a special sort of ball-shaped bomb to bomb a very specific target. And they even have training shots of them trying to bounce and roll this ball into all sorts of positions. And this really does have all the hallmarks of what 618 were doing. So much so that they actually use some test footage from 618 Squadron. It's really similar to the idea of this precision bombing using specialist weaponry. So both Mosquito Squadron and 633 Squadron are taking the best bits of the Dams raid and the called off Highball raid to create their fictionalised versions of those events. It's interesting how influential these films can be. Now, some of you may know that when creating Star Wars, George Lucas borrowed from the Dambusters film with his attack on the Death Star. There are many similarities between the Lancasters going in onto the dams and the X-Wings going down, firing their torpedoes at the Death Star. Well, this can also be found in movies such as 633, where again, there are lots of similarities in the way that those raids are portrayed. And it just shows how George Lucas was taking those stories and putting them into his. But when I was watching this test footage of 618 training, it really made me think of those scenes in 633 Squadron movie where they're sort of trying out their weapon. It's quite amazing. I mean, look at the tests here, rolling on the ground, hitting that wall, and look at those bystanders in the background, the observers seeing things close up. And it also does beg the question, why was the bouncing bomb never used again? Now, the official line on this has always been that when the surprise element of the bouncing bomb was revealed after the Dams raid, it couldn't be used again. But I've never really bought into that. I've always thought there must be something more here. I mean, a bouncing bomb theoretically could have been used against dock gates, like in the San Nazaire raid, or ships in harbours, like anywhere in the Italian or the Mediterranean theatres of war. So if the surprise element isn't the real answer of why it wasn't used again, it must be something else. And I think it's just because it was tricky. And this is borne out a bit by two other nations who played with bouncing bomb technology. The first of whom is the Germans themselves. After 617 had done their raid, some of the aircraft didn't return home and some of the bombs weren't detonated. And in fact, one of these ended up in the hands of the Germans. They had this unexploded Upkeep mine and they very quickly worked out what was going on. They soon realised that to get it to bounce, they needed that crucial spinning, that back-spinning action, which would help it bounce along the water. But they didn't really know how to achieve this. They put some of their scientists on it, and the solution they came up with was to fit small rockets around the edge of the mine that would fire and start the spinning before releasing the Upkeep mine. I'm not sure this would have worked. It would have been difficult. What's more, the Germans didn't really have an aircraft big enough to carry an Upkeep. If they were ever going to make their own, it would have to be probably a bit smaller, less efficient. So I don't think it was worth their effort to work out the technical difficulties. And technical difficulties there were. In fact, Barnes-Wallis only just overcame everything, and that can be seen here in the other nation who did try out the bouncing bombs, the Americans. There is again test footage of Americans trying these bouncing bombs with pretty disastrous consequences. It was difficult. The height you had to fly, the speed you had to fly, the backspin, when you dropped it, all of these elements had to be done perfectly to get the right effect. And that's a lot of effort. I think the real reason that Dambusters raid was a one-off and Upkeep or Highball were never revisited is that they were just such hassle that there was much better things to be doing with our time and energies. There's loads more interesting bits about the Dambusters raid in my notebook, but this is just a little sample of it that I thought would be interesting to look at. So if you've enjoyed this video, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel, find the History Tellers on both Facebook and Twitter, and come back again another time for more Tales from a Notebook.